Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 17th panel since we started this series. And as usual, I remind you, or for those who weren't here the last time, present to you very briefly the case we heard last time. And then I'll introduce to you our speaker for tonight. So our last panel, more than a month ago, was presented a case of a woman and her family who had fled the Ukraine shortly after the beginning of the war. And so did her therapist, Teresa. Teresa provided us with some powerful impressions and memories of what it had been like for her and the young woman she was to treat later in Austria to flee the Ukraine in the midst of chaos generated by the beginning of the war. Their escapes were marked by overfilled trains, worries about being separated from their families and friends, and about the uncertainties with regard to their futures. Teresa also provided us with heart-wrenching scenes of fathers and husbands having to leave their wives and children at the border since their services were required back in the Ukraine, their common homeland. Teresa described to us the fate of one family who had escaped from the Ukraine and who had come to Austria via Hungary. It may be worth remembering again that Hungary at that point and until now was not really interested in keeping any refugees in their country, and they were all too pleased to get rid of them and send them, among other countries, to Austria. This particular family was then picked up by Caritas and brought to a farmer's family in the lower Austrian region. After a short period of time of being housed there, the family realized that this farmer family, who had been all too ready to welcome them, had actually thought of them as cheap labor working on their farm. They were barely fed and had to adhere to a strict all-day working schedule. Not only did they have to work in the fields, but they also had to take care of their young children residing at the farm. Initially, the hosting family took full advantage of their guests' lack of knowledge of how to orient and locate themselves in this rural area. However, at one point, the family could not take it anymore, and they fled the farm, finding themselves in Vienna, where they came into contact with Teresa, who provided the young woman in this family with some counseling sessions. Curiously enough, this young woman, also a mother of a 5-year-old boy, returned to his host family a year later for a 1-week visit, whereupon this farmer family had a change of heart, now welcomed the young Ukrainian woman and her young son as real guests and not as working slaves. We speculated that the only friendship that had really evolved during their first stay was a friendship between the young children, and that this was a part of the motivation to invite the Ukrainian family back and to treat them this time as real guests. Teresa also helped us shed some light on the plight of the Ukrainian refugees once they had found a home in Austria or in Germany. Even though they were initially welcomed with open arms, maybe more open than was the case towards other refugees from other countries, this welcoming stance cooled down for many refugees, giving them a feeling in turn that they were just treated like stray dogs, being lost in a country not of their own. Teresa also told us that many women refugees pine to return to the Ukraine now, wanting to rejoin their husbands who were forced to stay behind. For some refugees, the separation from their husband has also turned out to be too painful, leading in many cases to divorces over the last 2 years. Jerry Fromm, at the end of our discussion, shared an interesting statistic with us. He informed us that the divorce rate in New York after 9/11 rapidly climbed, and that one of the most important indicators was to see which couple stayed together and which one divorced, was the state of their marriage on 9/10. So with this in mind, we are shifting our views today or tonight back from the fate of Ukrainian refugees to the wounded soldiers in the Ukraine. We are, as always, very grateful to the presenter in this case, and this time it's Svetlana Mikhailiev, to have volunteered to present a case of a young soldier who's in treatment with her. Svetlana is an assistant professor at the National Medical University and co-founder of a project in Lviv treating addictions. She has completed her psychoanalytic training through the Tutskayevich project in Ukraine. However, before we open the floor to Professor Svetlana, I want to introduce to you once again our two consultants, Françoise Davoine from Paris, author of many books dealing with the wounds and traumas left behind by wars, such as History Beyond Trauma, Mother Folly, Fighting Melancholia, and most recently, Shandian Psychoanalysis, and her most latest book, which is called Pandemics, Wars, Traumas, and Literature. And Jerry from Austen, Massachusetts, author of Traveling Through Time and Lost in Transmission. Jerry is also the director of the International Dialogue Initiative. Without Oksanar's wonderful simultaneous translation, we would not know how to talk to one another. So great things goes always to her. And without the Zoom technology provided in the back of this room tonight only led by Peter Neumeyer, we would not be able to technologically connect. So a big thank you goes to all of you. So thank you, and please welcome now Professor Svetlana Mikhailiev from the Lviv National Medical University to present her case. It's up to you now.
Thank you. Shall I start?
Yes, please.
So this case began during my volunteer work at the First Medical Unit in Lviv. And I came for a consultation of a service member who had a spinal injury and was abusing drugs. I entered the ward, introduced myself, said my name was Svetlana and that I was a volunteer psychologist at this hospital, specializing in addiction, and that I talked to the service members at the hospital if they needed. He replied, I'm my own psychologist, but since I'm bored because I've been here for a long time, let's talk then. I asked if I could sit down next to him. He said, have a seat wherever you like. I sat down and asked, how can I address you? He said his name was Vasil. This is a fictitious name. I said, very nice to meet you. Can I ask you questions? And then I have to say that our communications started to unfold, so to speak, very asymmetrically. I was reserved and polite, and Vasil was behaving in a manner of a protesting teenager who, okay, would talk to someone who is adult and very boring. I felt a little awkward at that, but I got into this role quite confidently. So after I asked if I could ask him questions, he said, shoot. Then I said, we've just met, and in order to communicate properly, we need to know a little bit about each other. If you don't mind, tell me something about yourself, something that you think is important. He said, if you've come to treat me, it's useless. Psychologists have already come here, taken some notes, and then disappeared. I said, maybe you weren't very friendly yourself and didn't invite them back. He said, I don't care about you psychologists because I'm bedridden and my only wish is to start walking again. I said, yes, this is a really big need and it would really be great if it became a reality. And then I asked, do you think you can somehow play a part in this? He said, no, it's up to the doctors to it. And he was adamant about it, but they aren't doing anything. I said, since you are in the hospital, something is being done anyway. And from my point of view, if you're lying here, something is being done to you. To which he said, they aren't doing anything to me because I'm a junkie and everyone gives up on me. I said, what made you say you were a junkie? He said, nothing. I am. I've even been in treatment once. I've even been to a rehab center once, but that was before the war. And I felt really identified with him because I've also had an experience of substance abuse. And then we continued. And I said, very interesting. Could you tell me more about this adventure? How did you go from being Vasil to being a junkie? He said, well, I've got nothing to do anyway, but if you want to listen, I'll tell you. And he started telling his story. When I went to study at a nautical school, I set a goal to become a chief mechanic of a ship. I studied well, and after graduation, I was given a good contract. I got on a voyage that went to Greece, but I was hired only as a fourth mechanic. And while these were short voyages, everything was fine. And then our crew was transferred to long voyages, and we were at sea for 6 months and even more. There was very little work and a lot of free time, and it was very boring. Then I started drinking alcohol, and once I bought a drug in the port. I started snorting it, and I wasn't bored anymore. I felt much better. And he asked, I listened to him attentively. Then he asked, well, do you like this story? And I said to myself that listening to this story, I felt that there were many lies in it, but I felt some strange sympathy and pity for that child who wants to seem much better than he is in front of an adult. I appreciated his imagination, and at the same time, I felt excited to be working with a tail spinner and a joker because he joked a lot. And then I said, that's interesting enough. I'd like you to continue. He said, well, you're suckers. One can make up a fairy tale and you start believing in it. I said, and this is how I felt identified with him again, because I realized that often such stories of addicted people really sound like fantasies, but I adhered to my adult position and said, what reason is there not to believe you if you are saying so? And then he somehow livened up and said, well, anyway, I started getting high back in high school. It was tramadol, then methadone. And when I had money, I bought heroin. And so it was from the 8th grade. And in case you don't understand, I'm not sober even now. It was, at this moment, I became a little anxious, but I realized he was under the influence. I could see it by his pupils. And I knew nothing threatened me, so I wasn't really worried. But I had this feeling that I was not talking to a sober person. But I didn't show it on the outside. I was sticking to my role, so I also livened up and said, well, you're lying to me that you don't go out, but you must be getting drugs somewhere. He said, don't you know that there are people called friends? I said, what do you mean by friends? He said, I have a combat buddy here in Lviv who has already been written off. He lives in Lviv with his girlfriend, and all I need is to send him money, and he will bring me everything I need, everything I will ask for. There's only one downside to this scheme. I've got to send money for 3 doses, so he can shoot, his girlfriend can shoot, and then they bring it to me. I said, wow, that's a lot of money. And he answered, I'm not a poor guy. I was on the front line since the beginning of the war. And it also, I realized he has a lot of money because they were getting really a lot of money at the front lines. And so he had enough saved in his bank account. And then we continued our conversation. And I said, listen, but if we want to get to know each other properly, then you need to be honest. There's no point in lying. And he said, well, generally, I've got nothing to lose, so I can be honest with you. And after a few minutes, he said that he felt really bad, not physically, because he didn't feel anything physically. He was paralyzed up to his armpits. But because of the realization that he was bedridden and that his life was over, it was haunting his mind. And one of his biggest regrets was that he hadn't died in that bombing and had become crippled. Someone who had to be bedridden all his life. And he said, you know, I'm starting to get sick now. I'm not ready to continue this conversation. So he let me know that I had to leave. And I said, yes, of course, I'm leaving. But if you don't mind, I'll come again. He smiled and said, suit yourself. I'm not going anywhere because I'm chained to this bed. And then I left his ward and I felt really sad. And I thought about what I felt towards him. On the one hand, I felt really identified with him as a formerly addicted person. But on the other hand, I realized that he is like a baby to me who cannot even walk, cannot do anything, just laying down, just this talking head making things up. And this evoked a lot of sympathy in me. And I decided that I was going to come back to him. So I left and I came back a few days later. And he greeted me with a smile and said, oh, madam, you didn't lie. I was baffled by his calling me madam because in Ukrainian we say it really familiarly or jocularly. And I noticed that he was very well shaven and his hair was combed. And so he looked differently. He looked better. And I felt some kind of anxiety that I could not explain to myself. And I answered that I answered to what he told me, that I'm Ukrainian, I'm not in the war, but I would really like to be useful to people who are or have been at the front line. And I said, if you want, I'll put it this way, this is my donation to the war. So I can speak to you, I can listen to you, and I regard this as my donation. He didn't pay any attention to this, and then he asked me a really direct question. Do you really think I can start walking? I was also very direct and said that I knew it was possible, but if he didn't help himself, it might not happen. And I asked him, Vasil, are you ready to help yourself so that you can start walking afterwards? He said, you're kidding. This is my biggest dream and desire, And if I knew what to do, I would do it all day long. But I feel really helpless. And then I said, very naturally, this may seem counterintuitive to you, but the first thing you need to do is stop using drugs. He laughed and said, yeah, and go crazy right away, right here at that moment. I explained to him that his drug use slows down the entire treatment process and cancels out everything the doctors did. I think that was the kind of psychoeducation about the drug's influence on the body and how it just goes against all the efforts of the doctors. And he asked me, and do you know what to do? Do you know how to stop using? Do you know what cold turkey is? Do you know how to stop using when you can always get the drug and when you really want it? And I said to him, listen, if you say, I want to stop and I'm ready to do something about it, believe me, I will find a way to help you. And he said, some of you already tried it here. I was taken to a psychiatric hospital, but then they kicked me out after 3 days because I'm unhinged without drugs. And even lying in bed, I was doing incredible things. And I also felt really identified with him, but I said, don't scare those who've been scared before. Say yes, and you'll see. He didn't answer, and so I left again. After that, we had a few more meetings. I came to see him at the hospital, and he asked me to take him for walks. He said that if you're so ready to support me, to help me, then take me out for a walk outside. I said that was possible if the staff helped me out to get him ready because they had to get him dressed and transferred him to the wheelchair because he couldn't move. And I said, I could take you on walks. And the staff, we made arrangements with the staff. About the time I came, they were getting him ready, placing him in the wheelchair. And I went with him around the yard of the hospital, pushing his wheelchair, and we talked. But these walks were usually very short because he was getting sick fast. While he was lying down, he felt better, but when he was getting outside, he was feeling really sick. And so it was never more than 15 minutes. And every time I brought him back to his ward, he would ask me to leave right away. So I was doing that. When I came to him for the 8th time, he said he was not ready for a walk. He was lying down. And he told me, listen, I've been thinking, and I still really want to start walking. That's my only need and my only desire. And if you say that I should stop using drugs and you know how to do it, then let me try. At that point, I felt great anxiety again, which I could not explain to myself because it seemed not logical in his situation. Having free access to drugs and being in this situation, a really difficult one. It was more logical to keep using, and I was baffled by that. I felt a little excited and also embarrassed, and I needed to gather myself to continue this conversation. I didn't know what to make out of this consent of his, so I needed to say, okay, I hear you, and then I left. And after I left his ward, at that moment, I got this initial thought that somehow he agreed to my suggestion to become sober. And he also, his condition was that I kept coming to him. So I was thinking about him sexualizing our relationship. But I did not refuse my own offer to help him. And the following time, I brought company with me, 3 guys who work at the rehab center. I introduced them to each other and said, these are the guys who will accompany you during the period when you're being treated. They will take turns being with you around the clock. So you don't have any more access to drugs. And so you're not left alone. And so you have company. And these 3 men were people with drug use experience who were now living in sobriety and who now work with addicted people. So they got to know each other. And it was a very sincere interaction right away because they also identified with each other. And so it went really well. It was a really friendly atmosphere. And I said, well, let's start now. And he asked, what do you mean? I said, from now on, your friend won't be able to bring you drugs because someone will be around all the time and we'll be regulating this thing. If someone wants to give you drugs, they won't be able to do so. He got very angry. He started to yell, started getting violent. And he said, that's not what we agreed on. And I said, well, you said you wanted to stop using drugs. So the first thing I have to do is to deny you access to this substance. And you said yourself that you wanted to try it. He was angry for quite a while. And then he said, well, I wouldn't want to be you now because I'm mean as it is. I'm nice right now. I'm nice to you right now, but you have no idea what I can do when drugs are taken away from me. Well, we treated this with understanding. And from that moment on, the first stage of his sobriety and the nightly duty of one of the counselors began. So everyone was by his side 24/7, and his withdrawal was really bad. He was haunted by nightmares because he had been in combat. He would yell. He was looking for his machine gun. He was like, he was replaying all the war episodes in his imagination. And he also fell out of bed a few times because that was really surprising, given that only his arms and head were moving and the rest of his body was paralyzed. So that was a really difficult period. He was accompanied by physicians, by psychiatrists, and we had to use medication because he could not sleep at all without medication. So for 5 nights in a row, he wasn't asleep. So they started giving him medication to help him relax and fall asleep. And he kept asking for drugs. And so this was his way to remission. It lasted about a month. And during that month, someone was always around, and I also came to him. And we would talk. I was the person who listened to him, and he could say anything he wanted to me. Again, when I came to see him and knowing about how people go through withdrawal, I was usually surprised because he was, every time I arrived, he always was shaven and his hair was combed, and he would change into clean clothes. And the boys laughed, saying that he was expecting me. And before you come, we have to do all the chores of combing and shaving and changing. So they were laughing and joking about it, but I was bothered by that initially, but then my internal anxiety got higher because of this. So after his condition became better, and after he got his medication, he took day antidepressant and sleeping pills. And so our conversations began to turn into more structured meetings. And I said it myself, that there was no need. Well, the most difficult period was over, so I didn't have to come every day. And I didn't see the need in that, and I couldn't afford coming every day. I had other jobs to attend to, so he agreed to have 3 meetings a week. So we defined the things that we would do in these meetings. So the first one was acceptance of sobriety. Second was getting to know his sober self. And for him, it was something that he could not fathom, because it turned out that since 8th grade, he had been sober for hours. Just for hours, not even days or weeks. And so his drug use never stopped. And the only times when he was abstinent when he was in rehab. But after 5 days, he ran away. And also on the ship, he also did not have drugs before he got to a port, but he was using alcohol in the meanwhile, so he did not know his sober self. And the third thing was that he said that he might not ever walk again, but how am I supposed to live in the wheelchair, asked he. And so I told him we also could discuss that and study this subject. I already said that we met 3 times a week, and that was mostly containment, psychoeducation, and also we used narcissistic regulation techniques. So the dynamics was positive, because staying at the hospital, he found an online course to study, to be able to work remotely. All he needed was a computer, because he said that he still had his arms and his head, so he was able to work. And also his sense of humor, which was really sarcastic and crude, became much healthier. And every now and then, he would demonstrate acceptance of his condition and the possibility that he might learn to live in a wheelchair. And we also did Google search about people living in wheelchairs, but living life to the fullest. And after 2 months of my work with him, after he was completely clean, he was transferred to a hospital in a different country. They accepted people with spinal injury for rehabilitation and treatment. And after much hesitation, because he wanted and didn't want to go at the same time, but we decided together that he should go and he should seize this opportunity and go abroad for treatment. So he did. And besides the main treatment, he also received psychological support. And I told him that he could stay in touch with me online, but he also received psychological support. So that was a good thing. he agreed and left. And then after a few meetings that we had online, he told me, listen, it's really hard for me to be away because I fell in love with you. And I won't be able to work with you as my therapist. And I said, okay, then I can't do it either. Okay, then go ahead with your treatment with a therapist that there are at the hospital. And after that, our therapeutic relationship was terminated and any other relationship was terminated. And then in about 3 months, he wrote me a message. Hi, I'm not a piece of meat anymore. I've been working out on my arms and legs. I'm working online and it looks like there's this girl who loves me. God willing, we'll see each other one day. So this was the story. And now I'd like to state my question for the therapy. So my request is, feelings of love emerging in patients like Vasil, a military man, severely traumatized in the process of inpatient treatment, rehabilitation, and psychotherapy. It's a very typical situation and as we know from our own experience and the experience of our colleagues. After all, this phenomenon has been described in psychoanalytic theory as erotic transference. But it would be important to explore the nature of this phenomenon in the case of patients like Vasil. Is being enamored like this different from the erotic transference already described in the literature, which occurs in a psychoanalytic relationship? How do you process this within the framework of psychotherapy, which cannot be considered a classical psychoanalytic procedure? We have a hypothesis that this is, so to speak, a false erotic transference, a desire for a holistic, resource-filled, protected, and preserved object that arises in wounded soldiers out of the need for narcissistic regulation. Thus, through rapprochement and fusion, they reinforce their narcissistic position, take the position of a hero who has preserved his good objects at the cost of such a sacrifice. And they also complement their lost narcissistic parts like amputated limbs, lost health, fallen combat buddies, all these losses by joining the intact object, the psychotherapist. And the goal of therapy in this case is to recover a constructive narcissistic regulation, not through this unconscious fusion, but through reflecting on the significance of their act, through finding new ways to function in the damaged body, relying on other dimensions of narcissistic regulation. Thank you, I'm finished.
Okay, thank you very much for this really wonderful presentation, very interesting presentation. And unlike other times, I'm very happy that you have such clear questions about this treatment. But maybe before we try and find questions to it, I always love to ask Jerry or Françoise if you have any other questions about him that would help you eventually ask this question about erotic transference as it emerges in these cases. Françoise, do you want to go first?
Yeah, just a question. When Svetlana, you mentioned anxiety that you did not understand at different moments. Can you now locate how it increased, or when it came? And second, I have an answer for your question right away. When the laws of man crash down completely, the only bearing is a feminine figure, the dame, the faraway, la dame the dame of the thoughts. I don't know how you say that in English. The war invented by the warrior poets in the 12th century. La Dame des Pensées, the Dulcinea for Don Quixote. And she is completely indispensable. She's vital. And you find that in the pockets of the wounded soldiers on the battlefields, you know, the letter to the faraway woman or the god, I don't know how you call that, marraine de guerre. And so you took that place right away by, you said, identifying with him from your own experience, so you understood. But at the same time, you took distance. You never trespassed that boundary. And you were steadfast. You were always there. And when you say the transformation, it's not a usual erotic transference, although the senses are really at work. It's not an abstract, it's not only idealistic, it's incarnated, but at the same time, far away. This lady, well, you call it the lady of the thoughts. It's a smiling lady. She's called the lady who smiles. And she is vital. And so I was wondering if your anxiety at some point was like a perception or a feeling that you were at a special place, not only because of your previous experience of drugs and you knew what it was about, so you were not judgmental, but because you felt that he was progressively putting you at that place, which is it's vital. La Dame des Pensées, we say in French. Okay, thank you. I don't know if you, so tell me about your anxiety that you felt little by little.
Actually, I completely agree that this was not anxiety about him being abusing drugs, but I felt that, the first time I didn't understand it, I just thought I was scared because I had never worked with paralyzed people before, so I thought that maybe I was apprehensive about this, but then I realized that it's an anxiety of being penetrated somehow. It's that I have to hold against this, and this anxiety was about me not opening up, that I came as a therapist, as a professional, sticking to my social role, and I was really worried not to say some unnecessary words or do something to invite these advances. So that was a really mixed feeling of worrying about myself, about my doing the wrong thing, and also this feeling that someone wants to stick this arrow into my heart. So they were not really rude and vulgar, but on the level of senses, it was much perceived by me. And so this is what caused my anxiety. Okay. And I also felt this ambivalence because on the one hand, I realized what his condition was. And on the other hand, I was afraid to let him cross the line and also maybe to cross the line myself inappropriately.
Just I add, but you were steadfastly wishing with him that he could walk not well, you were on this expectancy all the time. Am I right?
It's not that I was expecting, because the doctors said that that was possible.
Hmm?
Because every now and then he would feel his toes. And the doctor said if there was at least some feeling, that was, as long as there was some feeling at least, that was possible. So I was supporting him so he didn't lose hope that while hope still was there, he would have more internal resource. But at the same time, I said that he was able to live in the wheelchair. So that was an option too. So I was not like saying you will walk, you finish your treatment and you will walk. I said, but your hands are working, your head is working, and it's going to give you a chance to live and even help other people, other vets like you, who will be able to listen to you afterwards, because the service and the veterans are not really good at listening to civilians. So I was trying to incline him that to not to lose hope, but to adapt to his life in the wheelchair. And he even once said that, because we spoke a lot about imagination and about things that we picture that they may become reality someday. And he said once, I started imagining dancing tango with you. And at that moment, I also became tense, because I realized that I was more than a therapist in his fantasy, more like a partner, at least a dance partner.
Good. He was lucky to meet you.
Oh, Jeanne, can I jump in?
Thank you.
Go ahead, pick up, please.
Well, you originally
continue to dance the tango with Françoise.
There's a story about the visit of the French president to the president of France to Argentina, and the Argentinian president took the president of France to the tango and asked the French president, "What do you think of this?" And the French president said, "In France, we do this lying down." Oh my goodness! But you asked Jeanne if we had any questions. We already have the answer. But I did want to at least note that we haven't heard this man's story.
Right.
And we don't know anything about what happened to him before 8th grade, for example. Now, I'm kind of interested in where that history is in our conversation today. But to pick up with what Françoise said, years ago, Françoise and I were talking about the nom du père, the know and the name of the father. But we also invented the idea of the oui de la mère, the yes, and then in English, the oui of the mother. And that's what Françoise is talking about here. That that he saw in you, Svetlana, the yes, the kind of primordial yes of the mother to life. And when he said yes back to you, you got nervous, you got anxious, because there's a kind of fundamental responsibility in bringing the person to life, bringing them into life. It's the most basic thing there is. Nothing can happen without it. And it seems to me that's what happened. And it kind of makes sense to feel a certain anxiety about that. I mean, one can hear it as sexualization. One can also hear it as libidinalization of life. That is, feeling for life, of coming alive again, whether it's sexual or not. And so it seems to me that's what you are talking about. I'm very interested in the theory that all of you are building around the erotic transference in traumatized soldiers. I think that's really an interesting and important contribution. But the other part of this that I think might be an interesting and important contribution is you said to him that you can use your head, you can use your hands, you can use your heart, you can live, and you can help guys like you. They will listen to you. Now, of course, that's exactly what's happening between you and him. You worked something out in your own life, and whatever you accomplish there leads you to be able to talk to him, and he will listen to you. So what I found myself thinking is, Françoise talks about being near to the front, the front of combat. But there's also the front between you and him that you mastered and that he needs to master. And I think you got very close to that front between the two of you. And it's a source of anxiety, but it's also where the work had to happen, it seems to me. If that makes any sense.
Would you like, Jerry, to ask Svetlana some
Thank
questions
you.
about the story of him, or Svetlana, would you want to say something back to Jerry?
You mean his childhood and his school years? Do I understand you correctly?
Yeah.
His family life, his situation, what
That
happened.
illuminate a little bit more of, I mean, he was very, when
he lived in a city where there was a port, and his father was a sailor, and he would go out to sea. His mother used to work at a hospital as a nurse. He was an only child, and they lived in a private house, and he spent a lot of time with his grandmother and his father, because his father was often away at sea. And as a child, he didn't really like to study much, but he was an average student. And so he was, and he also did a lot of sports. All his life since childhood, he would do sports, like with really violent ones, like kickboxing and box and martial arts, sports where you have to fight. And even after he started doing drugs, he did not stop doing sports. And after ninth grade, he didn't want to finish high school, so he went to a nautical school to study to become a sailor. And then he continued doing sports, and then he went out to sea. And he was really attached to his mother. He still is. He kept his connection with her, and his relationship with his father was tense because he blamed him for never being there. And when he did harm, he would just bring money and presents, so that that's what substituted his relationship to his son by material gifts. And he didn't like his grandmother much because she was trying to discipline him, and he didn't like that. So he constantly fought with her. He also had a dog, a pet, a German Shepherd. And this dog was with him all his life. And then after she died, it was a huge loss for him. And I had this impression when he was telling me about his life. It seemed to me that there was no emotional relationship in his family. Like they were doing well financially, had this good facade, but with an emptiness behind it. So that's the impression I had.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Later on, when he started working, he had relationships with women, and a few times he lived with girls, and he was also really sad about this because he said that he couldn't even live with women and have relationships with women because he was paralyzed. But, well, he was not married, but he had partners with whom he lived with, 2 women. But he said that those relationships had been complicated because I was using drugs, and each time I picked drugs, not a woman. And so his strongest relationships he ever had was with his mom and with drugs, and with his dog, whom he loved. And then the rest of his relationships were pretty superficial.
I have another question. Did he tell you about what happened really at the front when he got paralyzed? You say he became crippled and he wished he would have died. Did he tell you about this, what happened?
Yes, he did. He told me that it was really stupid because the shelling started, and they started running to the trenches, and he was a little bit too slow, so he didn't have time to jump into the trench. So the shrapnel got him in his spine, so he fell, and he felt right away that he couldn't move his lower part of his body, and he started yelling because he saw that there were a lot of dead soldiers around, because he started yelling, "I'm alive, get me out." So they got him out, and after that he said that he lost consciousness. He didn't understand what was happening, but he had enough strength to yell out for his comrades to get him out, because otherwise he would have been left there. And then at the hospital, that was so stupid because that shelling could have been avoided. So somehow, why did we go there? That was not a battle task, but somehow we went there and the shelling started.
Oh. And I was very admiring the way that you started to give your dialogues to and fro, and he throwing you away, and you stayed, and you were, and he could find you not only as a therapist but as a good adversary, and you resisted, and there was like a battle in between you before the love. And so what I was so surprised when you say, okay, you are going, when he accepted to stop drug, which he had never done, you brought three guys.
Yeah.
So you did not say, oh, I am the only one, I'm super therapist. You brought the three guys night and day. That was an amazing decision that he accepted. Do you do that usually, or was it only for him?
That's what I usually do.
Okay. And the three guys, they stay night and day with a person who has to stop drug.
Before
we have a rehab center, so we usually do that in an inpatient center, but it was not possible to transfer him because he needed to stay in that hospital he was staying in. But if it's in our center, this is how it's done on a regular basis. There's always someone doing duty next to the person who is going through abstinence, because it's really hard both physically and psychologically. Those are really intense states, and if they were to be left alone, they won't be able to handle this, and we know that, and this is how we work usually.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Françoise,
can I get back to these three guys? But I see that David de Freitas has his hand up for a while. So I want to get to him, and then we'll get back to you, Jerry. And I wanted to ask something about the three guys too. David, you.
Thank you. No, I was just wanting to give a little comment. Yeah, I think I really enjoyed the way you described the case. Also for the way you answer to him and how you resist to him putting you away. This is for me an extraordinary lesson of the expectancy that you had, and it really allows us to see the nuance and the difference between false hope and expectancy, because you're there, you're realistic, but you believe, and you are at his side, telling him that there are possibilities and that you're going to be there. I think that also might have been a source of anxiety, because indeed, when you are there and you say yes, you're going to be there to be alongside through the possibilities, it does imply a responsibility, and not always easy to endorse. Still, about the erotic transference, I was thinking like just it's transference, it's like it's positive transference. And I wonder, I didn't really understand why the treatment, and I don't think it really terminated there when he said he was in love with you. I think that didn't mean that it had to stop. And I was happy that he managed to write you a letter. And, because I can imagine that within a treatment, a patient can say this, and, we can say that it's sort of a natural thing that can happen when the therapeutic relationship is working, because indeed it's life coming back to him. So I don't know. These were my comments. Thanks.
We have the question of the ending, and I had some questions about that too. But Jerry, I interrupted you. So
yeah, that's okay. I was with Françoise's comments about the early back and forth, the fight you had with him, and I was thinking about Winnicott's paper called "The Antisocial Tendency," which is a wonderful, wonderful paper. And in it, he said that when you're dealing with the antisocial adolescent, there's going to be a fight. And he says something like, it takes hate to hate. The other person has to know you can fight with them and survive in the service of the relationship. And also in that paper, he talks about the way in which, for the person with the antisocial tendency, The deepest wish is for a relationship. But what happens instead is the other person gives them a thing, something that seems like it's valuable, but it isn't the relationship. And that's the story of his growing up. His father brings him gifts, but doesn't bring himself. And so what happens? He lives out a life in which he has a close friend. What does his friend do? He brings him things. He brings him drugs. He doesn't bring a relationship. And so getting through that to actually the place where a relationship can start seems like it's really the most important thing, and that's what you accomplished. But I'm also interested too in David's comment about ways of dealing with the quote erotic transference here. In a sense, if one follows Freud, mother says to the Oedipal son, well, I love you too, but I've also got this man in my life who's important to me. I've got other things to do and other relationships that I have to attend to. You kind of said that around, we can only meet 3 times a week. So the place of the third, that is, in this case, the father, the other in your life, comes into the picture as the ordinary way of dealing with an erotic transference in a certain sense.
May I say something about that? Because I've been also, as you were, I think that there's a sort of repetition of 3. Right? It starts off that he tells Svetlana, I'm not interested in therapy. Nobody can help me because I have these 2 others there outside of the clinic for whom I have to pay before I get my drug. So I was thinking of that too as the sort of the bad injecting gifts he gets, and that's what he's used to. And then I think that moment where you introduce the 3 guys, which we didn't know until just a moment ago, that you do that with everybody, I think came at a really interesting moment, because you just had told us before, and we could sort of feel it before, that you were thinking and guessing that there were some erotic feelings of him towards you, because you had picked up that he was, was clean shaven, well dressed, etc. So I thought that there was both sort of a buffer that you created between you and him, and on top of it, from what you're now telling us, there were also 3 guys who stayed with him, not a father who would go away for 6 months and just bring presents, but actually 3 men that on one hand allowed you to continue seeing him, but on a less intensive level, and the presence of 3 men constantly being there for him. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to say, but I also have some questions about the end. We have Michael Feldman, and then we have Françoise again. Is that okay, Françoise?
Yes, the best theoretician about that kind of love is Cervantes' Don Quixote, because he was himself, Cervantes, elite warrior who lost completely the use of his left hand, came back maimed and very poor, and was 5 years a slave in Algiers. So when he was put to jail again in Spain by injustice, he had that character, Don Quixote, appear, and he wrote it, and he was unknown, and everybody in Europe read that book because everybody knew what war was about. And Freud, when he was young, identified himself with Don Quixote, except that at some point he discovered that his father had abused his brothers and sisters, so he let completely go all that trauma psychoanalysis, and he turned to Oedipus. But before that, Don Quixote. So what is the main figure, I insist, is what you embodied, the lady of the thoughts. You made him think again instead of blurring his thoughts with drugs and not. So when he stopped, and that was immensely courageous, thanks to you, to the strength that you brought. You had to have a very, very powerful position, not powerful of power on him, but you recreated a place of the possibility to think and speak, of course, that goes together. So I was so it's the transference in that special situation is different from the transference in classical psychoanalysis. And so I wonder for women, for warriors, the importance of the lady, which is not, Jerry, I'm not agree completely with you, which is not a mother. She's beyond the mother. She's the place of the thoughts and of the expectancy of the future, of the possibility to speak, of a first mirror. So the mother could be that, but it's much beyond. And I was so stricken that you took that place, not easily. I think you worked a lot to occupy that place, but to hold it. And so I thank you very much for your presentation. Read Don Quixote.
Thank you.
Svitlana, do you want to say something to everything you heard before we get the next question from Michael Feldman?
No, I'm listening, and I'm strengthened in my conviction that what I did was right. I just, when David spoke, I wanted to say that I did suggest that when he said that he couldn't continue being in therapy with you because I don't want to talk to you as a psychologist anymore. I just want to talk to you as a woman. And I explained that these things happen and we could discuss this and find an understanding. But he said he didn't want that he was better off staying with what he had inside himself. So he didn't want to get into this. I guess it was a kind of a tragedy that being played out. His impossibility of being with me was more pleasant to him than trying to find the truth. Thank you very much. I hear a lot of really important and useful points that will be useful in my future work.
We're not done there yet, so let's hear what Michael you have to say. Would like to say.
Thank you. This is very interesting, and the discussion is as well. And maybe there'll be another time to hear more about Françoise' thoughts about Freud early theorizing and the turn to Oedipus in the way from the father. Of course, Jeanne, I was going to say what you said. I was thinking about the three men, the three brothers. I'm sure there's a prototype of threes in comradeship, but I just don't know it. And maybe even in warriors. I guess I was thinking that maybe in addition to an erotic transference, that perhaps the therapist was seeing as a new substance, a drug. I do hear the analyst is bringing thoughts and bringing an attuned mind, which is not the same as a drug. But I wonder if what he was thinking, and if his attraction to you and the way that it made you feel uncomfortable, and understandably thought about erotic transference, if maybe there was something of the craving, or a kind of craving that you sensed consciously or even unconsciously, that may happen with patients like this. And that in bringing the three men, I'm thinking of the Fates, I guess, they did not bring him things or gifts or drugs or candy. I think they brought him relationship, as Jerry and others have said. I wanted to ask, though, I wasn't sure if they always came as a group together, or if you mean they took turns, that they were three people in shifts, so that
yes, they took turns.
Okay.
Yeah, they took turns.
Okay, maybe I missed that before. So that he knew he wouldn't be alone. There would be a friend, and not a dealer, not a drug dealer. That was my question, and that was my thought.
You know, I can answer that. I had the feeling that I'm becoming a function for him, not quite of a substance, but filling him up the way a substance would. Like he would be expecting me to come, and this really is similar to the ritual of preparation of procuring the drug and then getting ready to take it. That's what he was doing. He was expecting that, and he was planning for that. So that was there 100%, and that he was going to use something.
Just one more thing. There were attendants working in the hospital who would help him shave and dress, or was it the men that you brought? Attendants in the hospital. So.
He would ask the hospital staff, nurses, and nannies who would help, but these guys also used to help him because he was not able to do it on his own.
But he did do it before you introduced him to them. He found other people to help him prepare the ritual.
I just want to perhaps...
Right.
Yes, may I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
I was stricken by the fact that in the beginning, the real stake between you was honesty. You were not fooled when he was speaking.
Honesty.
You had enough experience to tell him, you are lying, you are lying. And he knew that you were not fooled, and that he could stop, decide to stop the abuse, which was the first time, really, because of this honesty between you, that you would not swallow anything, and you were building on the given word, or on the promise. You kept your promise. You came back, and that was the first time. You came back. You kept your promise, and that is all along. What do you think of that?
Yes, I think that on the one hand, there was this expectation. He was surprised because the way he put it, that psychologists came and go and went, and I showed some stability, that I kept coming with, despite his yelling and behaving like a teenager, I still kept coming, and I was cool about it. So I didn't treat him as a junkie, because these people often are treated in a specific way because they behave in a specific way. So this is what leads to it. And I treated him evenly and calmly and confidently. So this was also an unusual thing for him. Like, he would yell and say things to me, and I said, well, yeah, your mood is probably not very good. I wasn't saying things back to him. So that did create a particular relationship. And I often said that if we were to communicate, there's no point in being dishonest, because that was only going to bring us more apart. So that honesty was also useful for the relationship. And this was his need. He needed something true and something real, because he would often say that in the war, people are honest. They have no need to pretend and to make believe, because they are all united by their need to survive. And so he was able to see that I was genuine. I was coming and being true in coming and in doing things I had promised. And I think this sort of helped him identify me with his combat friends. So probably that's how he felt my presence.
Yeah, I think you are a warrior yourself, as you said.
We have a comment from Siri. If I remember, Siri, you well, you were the one who presented us a case probably a year ago about the woman who was hiding in the basements of Kharkiv. And we have a little trouble today with getting the pictures of everybody. So Siri says in the chat that his metaphor for this young man is, no, for Svetlana is that she's a new D'Artagnan with 3 musketeers. I have to admit, I do not know what a D'Artagnan is. Please tell me.
That's misspelled. That's right.
Ah, les 3 mousquetaires. Okay.
And who is D'Artagnan? Who is the?
It's the one, the fourth element, I would say.
Yes, the fourth.
Okay. Okay.
Merci, David.
The charismatic leader.
Well, Siri left us always with incredibly powerful metaphors. I still remember the metaphor of the oil tanker for your case. But we need to go on. Ira Yonyak, please. Try with the image. I don't know why some people can be seen. And
hello, I'll be really quick. Hello and hi, Svetlana. And I just wanted to give you some feedback for that you worked with an addicted person with him. That's has a lot of weight indeed. Also, you work with him as psychotherapist and psychoanalyst. That's another thing. And then the third, as a woman and a mother. And these are 3 lines. This is my personal opinion. And maybe I could be wrong, but the first option, working with him as with an addicted person, maybe it takes up too much space, but I'm not sure, but maybe that was the right thing to do. And the major thing I think in this situation is I've had instances of working with people with leg amputations and injuries, but when they encounter a sincere person, you have to be sincere and understanding with these patients, and you've got this in your relationship with him, and he would shave and he would clean himself to see you because that would be important for him, and after that he would be doing something different. But the only thing you could wish for is to just keep your boundaries. So thank you very much for this work. Thank you. Well, that was it.
Thank you, Ira. Jerry, you're next.
Yeah, I was thinking about his, the family dynamics in his growing up, and also thinking about the story of the front, where he's wounded and he yells. He basically says to his comrades, don't leave me, I'm still alive. Don't leave me, I'm still alive. And I'm thinking about that in the context of his father's repeated leavings, and the longing this boy must have felt for his father, and the anger at his father for not being there for him in various ways. And so one thing I have in my mind as a kind of formulation about his development is that in the 8th grade, when this young man becomes an adolescent and is full of anger and sexuality and left only with his mother, what does he do to take care of himself? He starts drugs to manage the intensity of his emotions, both his sexuality and his aggression. And so in the course of the treatment, you say to him, he says to you, you won't be able to stand the violent part of me if I'm without drugs. And you say to him, well, with my team of men, I can. And you can too. And you help him survive his aggression as a connected team of men and a woman. And he does, and he goes on. And then he says to you, I really don't want to talk to you as a psychologist. I want to talk to you as a woman. And you say back to him, essentially, I'm married to the task. I'm married to my profession. And so, we can understand your feelings, but when I meet with you, I need to meet with you as your therapist. And he says, well, I guess I'll find somebody else then, both as a therapist, but also as a love partner in life. To me, there's a trajectory in here of human development that makes a lot of sense to me in a very progressive direction.
Sorry, just getting dark here. So yeah. So Jerry,
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is that he got overwhelmed, right? I mean, overwhelmed by being left alone with his sexual or libidinal feelings towards the mother, by the father not being there and not coming really back for a long period of time.
And left alone with his anger toward his father,
right.
And the aggression. What do you do with all that aggression? Who's going to survive it to help you through your development?
But don't you think he's sort of taking it also at himself, the way he describes himself?
Took it out on himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and had to numb it in himself through the use of drugs.
Yeah. Because even at the end, he sort of, I mean, I was really struck by how he called himself, that he's no longer just a piece of meat, you know, now, so there was some, I felt some jouissance in the way that he denigrated himself, you know, especially also at the beginning, you know, I'm just a junkie, I'm just a jerk.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he had to do when he was sort of so left alone in this diet with a mother.
Yeah.
So this move of getting these 3 separate guys in there, I think was a very important move that had a very important meaning to him. Sort of recreating a kind of safer Oedipal situation between him, you, and the guys. William McGillivray, please.
Bill. Yeah, I want to weigh in on this big conflict between Jerry and Françoise. I don't think it was erotic transference, and I think it's a Dulcinea person, and he had no interest in having sex, but is the 21st century, so he had to put it that way. But what he really wanted you to be was this idealized object, this idealized person that he could organize around. And so it makes complete sense that he then could let you go because he had you, that it wasn't about a, quote, real relationship. So it wasn't a transference reaction. It was part of this idealization that he needed to see himself in a more idealized way. That's my thought.
Agree with you, Bill.
What did you say?
I do too, in my own terms.
Françoise, what did you say? I couldn't get it.
I said I agree with Bill.
I do too, but I think the body is also involved.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because life, you say that
Sure.
very well, Jerry. Life is
Yeah.
coming back, so it's erotic, of course.
Exactly. In a person paralyzed from the waist down.
Right, but in the romances, what they wanted was simply the scarf of the idealized woman. That was erotic enough, was to have some kind of object of theirs that would confirm it, because they often fell in love with married women, or at least that's so the story goes, and so they weren't interested in having an actual sexual relationship. Anyway,
that could get complicated.
You mean unrequited love, sort of the courtly love that Zizek was talking about? Is that what you said?
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. Michael, you raise your hand again. Maybe we can see you.
A quick question. Can you see me or hear me?
No, not yet, but maybe you emerge like William did.
Okay.
No, we hear you.
I don't know. I can see me, but I'm not good at technology.
Say something.
I wanted to just ask about, I think at the end, when he wrote the therapist a letter, I just want to make sure I understood that correctly, where he tells Svetlana that he has, the part I remember, Jerry, is that he found a girlfriend maybe, or that there's a woman he's in love with who may love him. Maybe because I missed the part about a new therapist. But when he said, I guess I want to put, I don't know, Jesus and Mary in here somehow, because I think he signed the letter or ended the letter with, hopefully we'll see each other again, God willing, or something like this. And I'm sure it's a particular language in Ukrainian, if that's what he wrote in. But I wasn't sure if he meant the therapist, if he meant the girlfriend, wherever she may be, or if he meant the therapist, or both, of course, and maybe his mother. because of the religious connotation it had for me.
Well, the way I understood this message from him, the way I felt it, he has great hopes of coming back, whether on his own legs or in the wheelchair. He wants to narcissistically assert himself that I'm a man, I'm strong, I'm capable. And I think that for him, this encounter with me, the one he mentions, is the ideal picture that he is painting himself. And maybe this is what urges him on and stimulates him to progress. And I think this idealization is pretty stimulating for him in his development and in his treatment.
So the you is you. God willing, I'll see you again is you.
Right, yes.
Idealizing you.
Yes.
David, c'est à toi.
Yeah, I just about this termination and actually this letter. I think if he changes his mind and he thinks he might accept you as a therapist in the future, that perhaps it could be interesting to accept. But I actually wanted to make a comment on this setting that you have with 3 people being there 24/7. It made me think, because I have a patient that is heavily addicted to several drugs, and I was thinking the other day alone, how could he ever stop? And I imagined, well, someone would need to be next to him all the time, and that doesn't exist here. I work in Belgium, and there is no rehab center where you have that happening. People being there next to someone 24 hours. I mean, and I think it's very impressive, though, what you put in place and what exists. It's an enormous lesson for our services in rehab centers here, I think. So thank you.
Sure.
We receive lessons from you a lot. And but once again, at each time, each case, particular case, like this, you and this young guy who is in a desperate situation from outside, speaks to a lot of them, I am sure. It's not only one story, it voices very powerfully for others who are in similar situation. I don't know if it will be, perhaps, I see Oleksandr Fodorets there. Is it something like that you will speak next time about the extension of this, what we do there, what we hear each case, and how it can extend in a broader echo to similar situations?
Dr. Fedorets, do you want to say something?
Next time I'm planning to speak about my experience of working with a group of volunteer psychologists. But I would like to add a few thoughts to this discussion. It seems important to me that in the light of narcissistic relationship, the splitting mostly happens not into good and bad objects, but into strong and weak objects. And this therapy was successful because Svetlana was not just a good object, but a strong one in this therapy. And she has been showing strength, not the one that frightens, but the one that makes you feel respect for it. And the second comment I think is important, that with addicted people, their drug is the good object, and they experience their abstinence as being separated from their good object. And perhaps, and it's only possible to abandon drug use is only when a stable and good and strong object is nearby. And probably this is how he was brought back to human relationship. But I'm not sure he was ready for triangulation, because he has not accepted you as a therapist, because he told me, I don't want you as my therapist, I want you as my woman. So I think that this relationship has a perspective of continuation. Thank you.
Just as one thought I'd like to add to what Oleksandr just said is in a sense one aspect of the strength, Svetlana, that you showed. And I was very very taken with your phrase, he shot an arrow into your heart, which of course is a metaphor for falling in love, for being pierced by Cupid's arrow. And in a sense, one aspect of the strength was to allow yourself to feel that in English, I want to use the word smittenness, that love, that kind of reactive love in response to him, and working from it in your role, rather than succumbing to it as simply a person who's fallen back in love with somebody. Surviving the arrow into the heart was part of the strength from my point of view, and working from that place.
And not shooting it back, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to, before we have to end, I wanted to ask Alexander Filts. Alexander, are you there? Because you said to me before this program that before we started today, that you've had many cases of young soldiers being addicted, falling in love, or developing erotic transferences, or as we heard today, idealized transferences. Do you have any other questions? Do you feel like, are there other questions left? Because you wanted to really focus on that today.
Thank you for this question. And I think that Svetlana reflected this aspect beautifully. And the only thing I might add, that we are all really interested in these cases being pretty frequent, and that they mostly happen with patients who are really damaged physically, that the bodily part of their ego is really damaged, and that bodily part of their ego is seemingly calling to something. Well, we've been reflecting on these cases because we noticed them earlier, but it seems like a platonic feeling. So our question is whether it's a purely erotic or sexualized feeling. And by this, I mean more psychological aspect, not the bodily aspect, because we think this platonic aspect of this feeling is an aspect of the object that speaks to these patients, that this ideal image will never abandon them. It will always be there, whether in the physical form or in their imagination. Because this Platonic feeling is more in the imagination than in reality. And wherever he is, in Germany or in Ukraine or any other country, it's like that this imaginary feeling of love is a huge resource for these patients. And then, as Svetlana said, it was really important for him to show the repairing of his narcissistic feelings. And it's like, wait till I come and show you that I am worth of this image. And he gives this signal that someone else already loves him, but he still wants to see Svetlana again. So maybe this has to be separated, well, the Platonic love and the sexual love. And we were really interested in that phenomenon. That's why we decided to present a case like this. But we also noticed that there are more and more of these cases, and we did not have a recipe to how to treat these patients and what to make of this. So maybe we'll have a different case like this with other emphases. So we might present another case like this to help understand this phenomenon more.
It struck me, Oleksandr, when you talked that, since Françoise was talking about that Svetlana was the dame, la dame de pensée, the dame of thoughts, that maybe in the end, when he wrote the letter, he turned himself into the chevalier, saying he has another girlfriend, but nonetheless, I think he reacted very courtly, quite in contrast to the beginning of his relation. I mean, to the initial encounter with Svetlana.
May I say something?
Yes, we have to come to an end, so I wanted to just
quickly. Oleksandr, you speak of Platonic love, and in the banquet, comment on dit banquet en anglais, David? Le banquet.
The symposium. The symposium.
When Socrates is asked to define love, he speaks through a woman, very strong, like Svetlana. She is Diotima, and she defines love very quickly, very simply. He is Eros, is in a case of war and of plague, because Diotima was a great healer during the plague in Athens. And Socrates was a warrior before in the wars. So she defines love as the son of a father who is poros. And what is poros in Greek? It's the passage, porosity. And that's what Svetlana said always. There was a porosity between them. She identified himself. She saw him like this. There was poros and peña. And peña is penury. Penury in English? Poverty. In the absence of words, in the penury of words, of resources. This love, eros, is therapeutic. That is what Plato says in the banquet, symposium. Porosity.
Thank you for that. Jerry, one concluding thought, and then I want to.
No, I'm gonna stay with the symposium on that one.
All right, Svetlana, do you want to say at the end, with all the comments you heard, what was maybe really helpful to you? Or?
I'd like to say that I found myself in such a pleasant company, and I've got a huge resource, and I've heard many things that that asserted me in my convictions, and I think that this is a really relevant issue because I'm not the only one facing a challenge like this, and that this has been spoken much about, and I think that with time this will get easier. And also I have this huge hope that this man will be all right. In this atmosphere, this is how I felt, that I'm okay and he is going to be okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe he will come back and see you one more time. Anyway, we will see.
Can I ask Svetlana one last question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, will it be enough for you to be the dame of thoughts for of many, many patients like that? Yes, I guess so. If as long as I'm able to present my cases here, I think there will be enough of me.
Ah, c'est gentil.
We'll be happy to have you again. Yeah. But we do need to come to an end.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Françoise, Oleksandr, Jerry, and Svetlana. We will meet again on June 13th at the same time. And it will be Dr. Federitz who is going to present a case on the 13th. And we're really looking forward to that. And thank you. As Françoise said, we're constantly also learning from you. So that's been a very rich evening for me, and I'm sure for all of you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.